This is part 4 of our section on Islam. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at some holidays and some practices. I've started here with a quote from the Adhan, which is the Muslim call to prayer. We mentioned last week in the lectures that that Islam has 5 pillars or 5 main practices that all Muslims must follow, and one of those is Salat, which is prayer. And in most Muslim, predominantly Muslim communities, they will have mosques, of course, which are places of worship, places of prayer, and those mosques will have a tower, right? And from that tower, a muezzin, who is like a trained singer or a trained caller, will 5 times a day call faithful Muslims to prayer, and they will use this particular chant or this particular song. It goes, "God is great. I bear witness that there is no God except the one God. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Hurry to the prayer, hurry to success. God is great. There is no God except the one God." So when Muslims hear this, they know that it's time for prayer, right? Because they're expected to pray 5 times a day. And on the course website, I'm going to put up a little link to a video that where you can hear the call to prayer. If you want to, you can also just do a search on Google, and you can hear it. It's very haunting, and it's really quite beautiful. And some muezzins are actually there have been some muezzins who are famous singers who are well known for the way they call to prayer, and occasionally in the Muslim world there will be performances by muezzins practicing their particular styles of singing. The most famous of which, I forget her name, but when I was in university, I remember one of my professors showed us a video of her. One of the most famous in the Muslim world is actually an Indonesian woman, this little tiny woman who has this huge voice, and she travels around. She started doing the Adhan, calling to prayer in her own community, and she became well known for it. Now she's known around the world, and she travels around the world and performing her Adhan for audiences. This picture here, this shows these lines of men who have stopped what they were doing during the day for the call to prayer, right? So 5 times a day, Muslims are called to prayer, and they're expected to stop what they're doing, and that means you'll see people in the street, who just stop, and they'll have a prayer rug that they'll carry with them for this purpose. They'll put down the rug and they'll get on their knees and they'll turn towards Mecca. Of course, it's very important that they pray towards Mecca, and they pray all together. And in predominantly Muslim cities, it's amazing to see everyone just stop. Traffic stop, businesses stop, whatever you're doing. Businessmen, put away their cell phones and they get down on their knees and they pray. So we're going to go through the 5 pillars of Islam again. We're going to talk about some holidays as well. The first pillar of Islam is the Shahada, which is the testimony of faith, right? And again, that is, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger, or Muhammad is his prophet. You might have noticed, if you research Islam as well at all, a lot of times when people mention the Prophet Muhammad, they'll put these letters after his name, PBUH. What that stands for is peace be upon him. When Muslims talk about the Prophet Muhammad, they'll always follow his name with those words. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that, blah, 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 blah. In daily conversation, doesn't matter in what context he's mentioned. If you mention his name, they'll say, peace be upon him. And that is just, I think that just reflects how respectfully, how highly they think of him and how much they respect him. I want to mention that. Over here, this is the Shahada written in Arabic in calligraphy, right? So mosques or Muslim places of prayer and worship are iconoclastic. They have no images. They have no images of Allah. There are no images of the Prophet Muhammad or any of the other prophets. It is strictly banned. strictly prohibited. But one thing that they can represent in mosques is parts of the Quran, which is very holy. And particular surahs or particular verses will be written in beautiful calligraphy on walls of mosques, and especially the Shahada will be written. Here you can see, here's a mosque over the entrance. Here's the Shahada written in beautiful calligraphy. So we'll have a chance to look at a couple mosques later in this lecture. But just so you know that inside mosques there are never any images, but they will have beautiful calligraphy of sections of the Quran. So the Shahada is the testimony of faith. It's something that every Muslim needs to be able to say with their heart. If you feel like, if you're a Muslim and you feel like you cannot say it and mean it, then technically you're not a Muslim, right? Faith, it's like with Christianity, it's a religion that's based in faith. And the practice of faith. If you say it 3 times in front of witnesses, then that is a conversion. That's their version of baptism. It doesn't have to be a large group of people, but it has to be witnesses who are Muslim. A lot of times converts will say it in ancient Arabic, specifically in ancient Arabic. But the other part is that you have to know what you're saying, right? You can't trick anyone into converting. You have to know what you're saying and understand the meaning behind the words when you say there is no God but God and the Prophet Muhammad, and Muhammad is his prophet or is his messenger. So that is the first pillar. Salat. Say a little bit more about that. Muslims say that they don't pray to God to glorify God, because God doesn't need to be glorified. Allah is perfect in and of what He is, and God does not need to be worshipped. God does not need prayers or blessings, but rather people pray out of submission to God's will. Right? God commanded that true Muslims, people who submit to Him, should pray 5 times a day, and so they do. And actually, there's a story from the Knight's Journey, when the story of when the Prophet Muhammad ascended up into heaven and actually got a one-on-one audience with God, something that few of the other prophets ever got. But the story goes, according to one of my professors, that Prophet Muhammad left his interview, his face-to-face meeting with Allah, and on his way out he ran into Moses and Jesus and some of the other prophets, and they said, "Oh, what happened? And Prophet Muhammad said, "Well, he told me this, he told me that, and he told me that his people should pray 100 times a day." And Moses says, no, trust me. He says, I've worked with people before, I've done this. There's no way you're going to get them to pray 100 times a day. Go back in there and ask for a smaller number. And the Prophet Muhammad's like, he's a little nervous, but he returns to God's presence and he says, it seems a bit high. With all due respect, can we lower that number a little bit? And so according to the story, God lowers the number to, maybe 75 times a day. So the Prophet Muhammad leads again. He runs into the prophets. He tells them. They say, no, go back in there. Go back in there. So this happens several times, right, where the Prophet Muhammad asks again, it begs again and again that that number be lowered. And people will never be able to pray that many times a day. They'll never be able to be faithful to that commandment. So finally, at the very end, Allah says, okay, I'll make it 5 times a day, but that's the lowest that I'll go. And so, as the story goes, the Prophet Muhammad returned to the people and he told them everything they had seen and learned, and he told them that they had to pray 5 times a day. When they grumbled and said, 5 times a day, we can't pray 5 times a day, it's so many times. But Prophet Muhammad told them it could be a lot worse. So, the point of the story is that in fact, Allah expects people to almost pray without ceasing. And that's something you find in Christianity too. The Apostle Paul in the New Testament says you should pray in your heart. You should be praying without ceasing at all times. And in Judaism, there are also many prayers for during the day. And even in a lot of in Eastern religions and in Buddhism, you're expected to be mindful at all times of the day and not let your subtle mind take over you and not let your emotions control you, but always be aware of your surroundings. And in Hinduism, you can find ways of devoting yourself to the gods in every little thing you do. So in Islam as well, there's this idea that you should be in a constant state of prayer, right? But you stop during the day 5 times. You take 5 times out of your day to physically pray, to go through the motions, right? And that involves, the first thing you should do before you pray is you do a ritual washing. And then there is a series of motions that you do, which is shown on the side here. You put your hands up, put your hands down, you bow, you stand up straight, you get on your knees, you bow 2 times, you turn to your right, you turn to your left. And as you're doing these things, you're reciting prayers, right? You're not just doing this, you're reciting prayers. And at the very end, when you turn to your right and you turn to your left, you're blessing the people on either side of you as well. So you do this 5 times a day. You do it before sunrise, which according to most Muslims is the hardest one to get in, right? If most Muslims that I know say that if they miss any of these during the day, they miss the one before dawn. And they do it at midday before the sun passes its highest, so before noon. Or I'm sorry, after the sun passes at its highest, so afternoon, the late part of the afternoon, just after sunset, and then between sunset and midnight, right? Not everyone is always required to do all 5 prayers. If you are sick, if you are a woman who's pregnant or who's on her period, if you're very elderly, if small children are not required to do this, and if for any reason you can't do it, you can make it up elsewhere, right? You can make up these prayers at other times if you miss them, right? Because God knows your intention, and God knows that you are faithful, right? Even if you miss some of these things. There are also certain, I guess you could call them, there are other ways of praying, say from a chair. Like if for some reason you are physically unable to kneel, you can sit in a chair and bend at the waist like that, and that's still allowed as well. So that is Salat, that is prayer. Again, here's a picture of everyone stopping in the road. You can see side by side. These people might not even know each other. It doesn't matter, but as Muslims, they're brothers, right? As Muslims, they're all part of the same family. And doing this together, praying together, just having to stop on the street during the day to pray next to other Muslims, it creates a sense of brotherhood, a sense of unity in the people, that they're all Muslims regardless of where they're coming from or where they're going, or if you're a cab driver or a rich businessman. And you'll see that a lot. You'll see that sense of equalizing things and all people being equal in Islam, in other rituals and practices as well. Jummah is the Friday prayer. So Muslims, like the Jews, go to their house of worship on Friday nights after sunset, and they pray as a community. It's called Jummah. Their place of worship is called a mosque. As you can see, as I mentioned before, there are never any symbols or images in these mosques. And men and women sit separately in the mosques. Sometimes women have a completely different area, or their area is walled off. That's because, or if men and women are in the same area, then the women sit behind the men, and the idea is that so that the men won't be distracted by looking at the women while they're praying. Though I visited one mosque in Seattle. And I remember the women had a separate area to pray, and it was walled off, but the women themselves had actually requested the wall be put there. And the reason for that was that because in Muslim culture, men and women have very kind of strict gender roles. And it was easier for the women to kind of relax and kind of do their thing and just relax at the mosque if they had a separate area. If they were with the men, then they would have to kind of act more formally. So they requested their area would be walled off so that they could sit and chat during the time, so that their children could children usually go with the women, not always with the women. You can see here, this little boy stayed with his dad, but a lot of times the children stay with the women, and then the children can kind of run around and they won't bother anyone. So this is a huge mosque down here. You can see all the people at several levels. I'm not sure which country this is in, but and then you can see this is like a smaller mosque here, and so they vary widely, right, in terms of size and design and things like that. You can see here, here's an imam. Again, in the Sunni tradition, imams are leaders of the mosques. So when they come in, there's, at the beginning of Friday prayer, there is some praying. Everyone prays together. The imam will give part of his sermon, and then they'll pray again, and then the imam will give the rest of his sermon. It will be based on the Quran, right? It'll be based on the teachings of the Quran and the Hadith as well. These are just a few different images of different mosques. You can see the architecture. Mosques are so beautiful. I really find them just gorgeous. They use a lot of these domes, which doesn't have a religious significance. It's more of just the style of architecture in the Middle East, and as Islam spread across the world, the dome kind of went with the mosque. So this is this one down here is in Algiers, which is Algeria, which is northern Africa. This mosque, I believe, is in Jordan, which is the Middle East, and I think this one is also the Middle East. I'm not positive. And then this one here I want to show you, this is just a small mosque that's in England, but you'll find a lot of mosques in America look like this, right? They're small buildings. A lot of times here's the minaret. This is the tower from where the muezzin gives the call to prayer. But most of them are simple. But in these older Muslim countries that have been Muslim for many centuries, right? They have these giant, gorgeous mosques that can fit, hundreds, if not thousands, of people. So the next pillar of Islam, the Psalm, which is fasting during Ramadan. The month of Ramadan is the month where they celebrate the Quran being revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. Okay, so it's a holy month. And they are expected to fast during the day, which means no food, no drink, and no sexual relations from sunrise to sunset. After sunset, they usually have big meals together. It's a family time. During the day, it's of course not easy to fast during the day, especially in some of these countries that are desert. It's not easy to go without drinking water in the desert. And if not drinking water or not eating food is a physical burden for you because you're sick or because you're elderly, then you're not expected to do that. Small children are not expected to fast. Certainly, pregnant women are not expected to fast during that time. But everyone else is, and it is a show of submission to God's will. It is a show of personal strength, of sort of the spirit being stronger than the flesh, so to speak. It also creates a sense of empathy. A lot of Muslims find it creates a sense of empathy with the poor, and with what it's like to be poor and not have enough food to eat, not to be able to eat. Because of that, a lot of Muslims give extra zakat, or they give extra charity during the month of Ramadan. That's really common. But yeah, after sunset, families get together and they eat and they have special foods. And there are also special nightly prayers. In addition to the 5 prayers of the day, there are extra prayers at night called the Tarawih. And during the Tarawih, a lot of Muslims will recite portions of the Quran. And part of that is because the month of Ramadan remembers the Quran being revealed to Prophet Muhammad. Most Muslims make a goal for themselves to read the entire Quran during that month. So every day they're studying the Quran, and every day they're reading it. And one way they do that is they use the nightly prayers as an opportunity to get more of it read by reciting portions of it during their prayer times. The last day of Ramadan, at the end of the day, they have a huge celebration. It's called the Eid al-Fitr. And there's tons of food, and communities get together. A lot of times communities will meet at mosques. In America, they'll meet at mosques and have potlucks, which is kind of an American cultural thing. But this is one place, that the Eid al-Fitr is one place where local customs will really come through. In different countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, China, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Northern Africa, America, Canada, these different places have local, a lot of times Muslims have local customs, and you see those a lot at the celebration, right? They'll eat special local foods, they'll have games for the kids, they'll do all sorts of different things, and they'll celebrate the end of Ramadan together. These are some images here. It's really common, the beginning of Ramadan and the end of Ramadan, to decorate the streets with lights, to decorate homes with lanterns. People make a real effort to go to the mosque to pray on a very regular basis and to get all of their prayers in. Here's a group of Indonesian women at a mosque praying. These are their backs you're seeing. This is Eid al-Fitr. This is the feast on the last evening of Ramadan, right? Tons of people and tons of food. This is another market, and these are dates. Dates are a kind of dried fruit that grows really readily in the Middle East. It's really common. Dates are really commonly eaten as snacks in the Middle East. And according to the Hadith, when the Prophet Muhammad would break his fasting, he would start by eating dates. And so a lot of Muslims like to break their fasting at the end of each day of Ramadan by eating dates. And so during the month of Ramadan in the markets, tons of dates are being sold. You see them all over the place. So that is kind of like one of the biggest celebrations. Eid al-Fitr is probably the biggest religious celebration for the Muslims. And it is a day, it's not so much, I'm trying to think, mostly it's just about feasting. It's mostly just about eating. You know, it's in some ways it's similar to like Thanksgiving. It's a time of being with your family and eating and being grateful for what you have, because again, during the month of Ramadan, you experience what it's like to be without food. And you experience what it's like to, you create a sense of empathy with the poor, and so part of Ramadan is coming to appreciate the things that you have. Zakat is the next pillar of Islam. It means charity. Muslims are expected to give 2.5% of their savings. Now, there are really specific rules about what constitutes savings here. There is actually a rule within the Quran about nisab, which is the minimum amount of savings you need to have to be required to give zakat. So basically what that means is that if you're already poor, then you're not required to give zakat. That wouldn't make any sense. So how do you know, like, if you're required or not? Well, if you have the nisab. So the nisab is the minimum amount of savings, specifically savings that you have, like, in cash. Not counting your, well, in ancient times, your livestock, not counting your house, not counting things like that. Counting just your money. And the other rule of nisab is that you have to have had that amount of money for 1 year before you're required to pay 2.5% to charity of it. Reason for that is to be kind of reasonable, to the extent that sometimes your money, your financial situation fluctuates, right? You might get some extra income. Let's say you make an extra $2,000 this month for any reason. We have bills to pay, so you pay it out, and within a few months that money is gone, right? It never went into your savings account. You had to use it for things. So you don't have to pay 2.5% of that. If you get that money though, and a year later you still have, say, $1,000 left, right? That money has stayed in savings for a year, then you're required to pay 2.5%. The money has to go directly to the poor or directly to institutions which provide goods for the poor. You can't invest it in charity organizations. It can't go to paying people, you know, for upkeeping some of these charity organizations. It has to go directly to the poor. Here's an example here. This is an Iraqi charity. This man's from an Iraqi charity, and he's bringing clothes and things to an orphanage. So that's the kind of, you know, charity or institution that Muslims would support. So in general, Muslims tend to often pay more than 2.5%, right? Part of that is Ramadan. People usually give extra charity during Ramadan when they're kind of given a sense of what it's like to be poor without food. And because, again, this is part of the commandments given down from Allah through the Quran, a lot of people take this charity, a lot of Muslims take this charity portion really seriously, and they give as much as they can. And in general, the Muslim population as a whole gives more money to charity every year than any other religious group, any other religion in the world. Muslims give, as a whole, give the most. A lot of people don't know that. And so they also have very good, in Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, the Zakat, because Saudi Arabia, we mentioned in the last lecture, the Saudi government is strongly based on Sharia and based on Muslim law. So the government itself regulates the giving of Zakat. Okay, so the Saudi government, if you're Saudi national, the government keeps track of how much you owe in terms of Zakat, just like they keep track of how much you owe in terms of taxes. Other countries like Turkey, they don't do that. But a lot of times in places where they do that, the social welfare systems are really strong, right? People who are poor always have places to go to get food, to get clothing, to get whatever they need. They're really taken care of. We'll also see there's another time of the year at the end of the Hajj, the very end of the year, there's another festival, the Eid al-Adha, where it's common to give out food to the poor, right? So as a whole, Muslim communities do a good job of taking care of the poor. So the final pillar of Islam is the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca, right? It is required once in a person's life if you can afford it and if you're physically able to go. If you can't go, if physically you're unable to, if you just never have the money to, because it can be quite expensive, then God understands, right? You're not punished for that. But if you can, you're supposed to. And a lot of Muslims will spend much of their adult life saving money, putting money away every month in a fund, especially to be able to take their families on the Hajj. Approximately 2 million pilgrims go on the Hajj to Mecca every year. It is always performed in the last month of the Islamic calendar, the 12th month. Again, the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar. It follows the cycle of the moon, not the cycle of the sun, the way our calendar does in America. And there's a video I'm putting up on the website. It's a little short video where you're going to get to see images from the Hajj. It is a really special experience for Muslims. When you get there, men remove all of the clothes they've brought with them, and they are given these two simple white garments that they wrap around themselves. You can see them right here. This does a couple things. The first thing it does is it removes all sign of social status. So it doesn't matter what country you're from. It doesn't matter how rich you are or how poor you are. Everyone's wearing the same thing, right? So again, it's that sense of equality, that everyone's the same in the eyes of God, and no one's better than anyone else. Also, these garments kind of resemble funeral shrouds, the same kinds of shrouds that dead bodies are wrapped in, right? So it's a reminder of kind of the impermanent nature of life, the impermanence of the world, if I can borrow a Buddhist term. And it reminds people that ultimately everyone in the end is going to die, and everyone's going to stand before God eventually. So they put on these garments, and women wear very simple garments. Neither are allowed to cut their hair on the Hajj. They're not allowed to trim their nails. They're not allowed to wear perfume, or women are not allowed to wear makeup. They're supposed to just be very kind of simple and modest. While you're on the Hajj, there's no killing or hunting for any reason. You can't even kill insects. There's no arguing allowed. You're not allowed to argue with other people. And when I say 2 million pilgrims go on the Hajj a year, I mean pilgrims from all over the world. If you ever ask a Muslim if they've ever been on the Hajj, one thing all Muslims will talk about is what it's like to be in this place where, you have Muslims from all over the world. You have, Black Muslims, African American Muslims, African Muslims, you have Middle Eastern Muslims, you have Malaysian, Asian Muslims, you have Muslims from like Europe, blonde hair, blue-eyed Muslims, and everyone's speaking different languages. Everyone's speaking different languages, and no one knows what anyone else is saying, and yet they're all there for the same reason, and yet they have a strong sense of brotherhood, and because there are these rules about not killing, not arguing, everyone kind of helps each other, right? Everyone kind of helps each other. Because so many people go to Mecca at the same time, a lot of people end up staying in tents in and around the area. So it's really common to see kind of these little villages of tents with people from all over the world, and they're helping each other, right? They're all kind of working together, even though they might not even speak the same languages. So it really promotes this sense of brotherhood. So you'll remember that Mecca is the place from which the Prophet Muhammad came. It was the place from which he was expelled when he first started receiving revelation from Allah. The first Hajj, the first pilgrimage, is said to be when he originally returned to Mecca, when he originally returned after his long exile. Mecca is a holy place for Muslim people for that reason. Also because there is an ancient holy site there called the Kaaba that is related to the story of Abraham. It's said that Abraham set up a temple there, or a place of worship to God. And there is a story from the Quran about Abraham and his son Ishmael. You'll remember that when we talked about Judaism and in Christianity, we talked about Abraham and Isaac, and how Abraham was told by God to sacrifice his son Isaac. So according to the Quran, the story is just a little bit different. According to both the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bible, and the Quran, Abraham did have more than one wife. He had two wives. One was Sarah, and Sarah gave birth to Isaac, and then he also had a wife or a handmaiden. Maybe she was a handmaiden, and her name was Hagar, and she had a son named Ishmael. And Sarah was jealous of Hagar. She was jealous of Hagar having a son, so she convinced Abraham to send them away. So that's the story in the Bible. And according to the Quran, what happened then was that Abraham didn't want anything to happen to Hagar and to his son Ishmael. So he went with them, and he found a place for them to stay in and around modern-day Mecca. And he left. He went to return to Sarah and to his other children. And so Hagar and Ishmael were left all by themselves in the desert. And of course, they didn't have a lot of supplies, and after a while they ran out of water. So Hagar, the mother, went running between these two mountains. She went back and forth looking for places with water, and she couldn't find any springs. So according to the story, she was despondent. She didn't know what to do. And Ishmael, who was just a little boy at the time, struck his heel on the ground. He just kicked the ground with his heel, and a spring appeared. Right? God had taken care of them. God had blessed them, and so they had a spring of water, and they were able to survive. And when Abraham came back, he saw that they were still okay, that they had survived being out in the desert. So, so Abraham put a place of worship there. That is the Kaaba. According to Muslim history, the Arab tribes, the polytheists, took over the Kaaba, and they put in all of these idols. They put in many idols of many different gods. And one thing that the Prophet Muhammad did was he reclaimed the Kaaba, and he got rid of all the idols, and he returned it to a place of worship to the one God, right? So it has, so Mecca has all of these different holy attributes, I guess, all these different stories around it. It's really important. And also, we'll talk about the story of Abraham and Ishmael further. But one important part of the Hajj is that you walk around the Kaaba 7 times. See all these people? It looks like they're just, it's hard to even see, but these are all people. They're all bending in prayer to the Kaaba, and then they're going to walk around it. They're going to walk around it 7 times. And then they're going to go, the next part of the Hajj is to walk between the 2 mountains that Hagar walked between, recreating her search for water. And then the well that is said to be the original well that Ishmael found, people still drink from it, right? So you walk around the Kaaba, then you walk between the 2 mountains, then you drink water from the Zenzan well that Ishmael found. And then there are several other rituals and practices you do as well. The Hajj lasts many days, right? It's not something you do in one day, you do for many days. There are 2 pillars which represent the devil, and people throw stones at them. It's one of the last things you do. It's a really complex set of rituals. And in the video you're going to see, they talk about how a lot of times people, when they go on the Hajj, they'll bring like a sort of guide with them to guide them through all these different rituals that they have to do and everything. There's also a couple of special mosques in the area that people will visit. There are all sorts of things, and it's actually really common in faraway countries for Muslims to start their own travel agencies, and they'll specialize in the Hajj. They'll specialize in packages, airfare and hotel or tents or whatever things you need to go on the Hajj, and they'll send guides along with you. So it's a really important part of being a Muslim. Right, it's an important part of the community and the way they structure their lives. That eventually one day they're going to have enough money to go on the Kaaba. And there are also, I think, there are charity organizations that help provide funds to the poor who can't afford to go on the Hajj, so that they can. And then the Hajj ends with the Eid al-Adha, and technically the Eid al-Adha is a worldwide celebration. It is a 4-day festival at the end of the last month in the Muslim calendar. And remember that the last month of the year is the month you go on the Hajj on. So whether or not you go on the Hajj, the last 4 days of the month are a festival. It kind of coincides with New Year's, but it's not exactly New Year's. There are some similar practices. People will kind of clean their houses and go visit friends and other things that you would do at New Year's. But it's not the same as New Year's. It just coincides. And it celebrates the story of Ibrahim, or Abraham as it's pronounced. Ibrahim is the Arabic way of pronouncing Abraham. Being told to sacrifice Ishmael, because according to the Quran, Abraham is not told to sacrifice Isaac. He's actually told to sacrifice Ishmael. And in the story that's told in Judeo-Christian traditions, Abraham doesn't tell Isaac that God has told him to sacrifice Isaac. He just tells Isaac, we're going up to the mountain to give a sacrifice, right? And Isaac doesn't know what he's getting himself into. But in the story in the Quran, Abraham tells Ishmael. And Ishmael is readily willing to submit to God's will. Ishmael himself says, if this is what God says you need to do, then this is what we're going to do. And he willingly goes up to the top of the mountain And then at the last minute, just like in the story in the Bible, last minute an angel appears and tells Abraham that he doesn't have to do this, and that he's been tested and he's been shown to be willing to submit to God's will. Because remember, in the Jewish interpretation of this story, Abraham is proven to be loyal to God and to God's law. In the Christian interpretation, Abraham is proven to be faithful and to have faith that God has a plan. In the Muslim interpretation, Abraham is proven to be willing to submit to God's will. Though ultimately, in a way, they're all kind of being interpreted in the same way. Nonetheless, so then Abraham and Ishmael go and they find a ram who's wandering around the mountain, and they sacrifice the ram instead. So on Eid al-Adha, this is the one day when Muslims will sacrifice an animal. So you can see here's a market with lots of livestock. Any family who can afford it, specifically families who can afford it, are expected to buy an animal and have it sacrificed in the proper way. Families who cannot afford it might just go to a butcher shop and buy, meat, if they want to participate still. And then regardless if you have a whole animal or just some of the meat, you share the meat with your friends and relatives, right? So everyone shares this meat of the sacrificed animals on Eid al-Adha. And again, a lot of times families will give portions of the meat to the poor during this time as part of their Zakat, as part of their charity. You can see here, it's not only meat they eat lots of other special festival foods on these days, and the markets are full of people, and the markets are all selling different kinds of special foods and things. And again, it's a time of family and of togetherness, and remembering the stories of the Quran. So that is Eid al-Adha. That's the other major festival in the Muslim calendar. There's Eid al-Fitr and there's Eid al-Adha. So discussion for this portion of the unit is, what do Muslim practices and holidays try to teach or remind Muslims of? What do these practices and holidays try to teach or remind Muslims of? Email me with any questions that you have.